Good afternoon, good morning, and welcome to everyone, wherever you are. We're very pleased to have you join here at our first webinar of the year for 2021. So welcome to a new year, and yeah, we're very pleased to have you.
I'm Dan. And a new face, Dan.
Indeed, a new face. So I'm the new boy here. So my name's Dan Dewars. I've joined Stuart and the guys at Transparent Choice to head up their customer success division. So very much kind of looking after you folks who are working with us and making sure you're getting tremendous value from doing so. Today, I think I'm just the opening act. So I'm just going to let you know that, one, we are very pleased to have you here and do appreciate you making time. I know it's probably a funny time of day at certain parts of the world. So it's always tricky getting together, but we do appreciate you making the effort. Today's timings, I think we're aiming for about 45 minutes, and we have a hard finish at around about 10 to the hour. We have about 40 minutes, I think, of content, and then we should have 5–10 minutes for Q&A. Please, if you've got any questions, just drop them into the chat bar where I think we were introducing ourselves just a second ago. We will kind of compile those as we go through, and then we'll kind of address them right at the end. So don't break Stuart's flow. Let him roll through the presentation, and we're really keen to answer your questions. If you've got questions you don't want to ask to the group, we don't get around to, we'll also be sharing details at the end. You'll have a recording of the webinar. Yes, you will have our slides in case there's anything you want to borrow out of here. We'll also put links on for more resources on our website. Or indeed, if you want to reach out to Stuart or I directly, we can book a meeting with either of us. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Stuart, and yeah, I'll see you at question time.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Dan. So as Dan said, welcome everybody. We're going to do a slightly different talk to one. You know, I see a few names I recognize on the list already today, but lots of new names as well. So you're all very welcome. We're going to do something slightly different this time. We're going to do so how to do project prioritization the right way. We're going to go a little bit deeper into just one or two ideas than we normally do, and I mostly just kind of dig into why we can say the right way. Right? You know, what makes us think there is a right way. So the agenda looks something like this. You know, what's the portfolio for? Does prioritization matter? Quick spoiler here. Yes, it does. Is there a right way? And again, the spoiler is yes, there is. And we're going to build in a little bit of a demo. Now, this isn't the place where you're going to get the full product demo. We're just going to use the little demo segments to kind of illustrate some of the ideas that we talk through. And my beautiful assistant Dan will give me a hand when we get there as well. Then we're going to go look at, just spend a minute on how you can get your leadership team engaged in this process, and then share a few resources with you. And Preeti, who's also on the call today, she will be sharing the slides and a recording of the video after the event. So so that probably anticipates at least two of the questions that you're likely to get, Dan. Excellent. So so let's start off with this idea of, you know, goodness, Stuart, how arrogant, right? How can you talk about doing it the right way? How on earth can you say that? Because, you know, at the end of the day, if you hit Google and you type in project prioritization or anything else for that matter, you're going to find 1,001 different people giving you their opinion, right? Saying this is how you do it, or that's how you do it, right? Do it this way. I've done it this way for 30 years and it works really well. Well, all those videos and articles are, in a way, they're a little bit like all those patent remedies that you know, fake doctors used to sell 150 years ago, traveling from town to town. In that there's just no evidence to support them in the majority of cases. Now, these people who are publishing these videos and so forth may be quite well intentioned. They could even be really really experienced people, very professional. But generally, a lot of the content out there has no basis in the research, right? So it's someone's opinion. Now, I'm going to try and avoid my opinion today. what I'm going to try and do today is stick as close as I can to the research, see what that tells us about project prioritization and how to do it the right way. All right, so that's why the title is as it is. So let's start off with an age-old question, which is, what's the point? What's the point of doing projects? Well, the point of doing projects is to help your business achieve its goals, right? Your business has strategic goals, financial goals, and so on and so forth. And the clue is in the word goal. Goal means we haven't got there yet. And if we haven't got there yet, that means we have to change something to get there. And that change is usually or very often a project, right? The project is what allows you to change something, a process or a system or whatever it may be. But the project is what lets you change something to help you achieve your goals. And very often we think financially, but usually a lot of the goals that people really care about are not financial. So an example of that is this one. So a partner of ours, Hartley McMaster, did a lovely project with the Royal National Institute for Blind People here in the UK. So this is a charity that helps partially sighted people live, more fulfilling, more complete lives. And this work was written up in the Operational Research Society magazine. So again, this is based on the research. This is their kind of trade publication where they publish research into all kinds of OR issues. And this was really nice because none of the goals that they had were financial, right? It was about improving people's lives, removing barriers, and things like, removing barriers for partially sighted people and things like that. And so by starting off with the stakeholders, right, the users of the service, they were able to build a really clear picture of what the goals were, what the challenges are that the stakeholders wanted to address, and then align their activity with those goals and drivers. All right, so this is a really good example of how all the projects flowed from what are our goals, right? And so in this case, certainly not financial. Now, unfortunately, as an industry, we're not very good at doing this. So PMI data, so again, research comes from the pulse of the profession. So they survey several thousand PMOs around the world. So this data is reasonably good. It says that 1 in 5 projects, 20% of the projects that you're doing are waste. They just don't really support the business goals of your organization. Now that's pretty shocking. So I wonder, why does that happen, and what's the effect of that waste? Well, so most organizations have a prioritization process. Now, it may just be pulling your executives in a room and people come in and pitch ideas, or it may be more formal in a spreadsheet or something like that. But you have a process. And many organizations think of that process, they don't really put a lot of effort into it, into optimizing that process, because, well, it's just part of the budgeting cycle. Wrong. You could not be more wrong. Yes, you may be allocating budget and resources, but this is so much more than just being part of the budgeting cycle, and here's why. So you have your prioritization process, and it leads on to an implementation. Now, we just saw that 20% of your resources are being wasted. So that's a direct waste. And that waste is worth an awful lot more, many, many times more than the total cost of effort that you put into prioritization. And even that's not the end of the story, because that waste of resources, those projects that those resources are working on, are taking resource away from projects that would have added even more value. So actually, the real cost is the missed business opportunity of the projects that you should have done. Okay, and that lasts forever. That goes forever, right? And so that's not just, gee, we spent $1 million that we could have spent better. That's, we spent $1 million we could have spent better that would have driven $10 million of value every year for the next 10 years. Okay, orders of magnitude more than the effort that you're putting into prioritizing. So what would happen if we put a little bit more energy and maybe not even more energy, but more method into that prioritization process? Well, for a start, you're going to reduce the amount of waste. Probably never get it down to zero, but you can reduce the amount of waste in the portfolio. And so that's going to, that's a big dollar saving. But more importantly, that gets amplified again in the delivery to the business value. Okay, and again, that value, that extra value, lasts forever. So a small investment in improving the methodology, improving the way that we select projects, can have a truly massive impact on the value delivered to the business. And we call that the prioritization amplifier. And whether it's 10 times or 100 times, that's not really the issue. We don't really know. I just put those numbers there to be provocative. But it's a big number, right? And we've seen customers where the return on investment is 1,000 times the cost of improving the prioritization process. So that's all very nice, Stuart. I hear you cry. But is there any evidence for this? I mean, you said you were going to be evidence-based. That all sounds rather woolly and made up. And the answer is yes, there is some evidence. So this is research out of Brunel University in London. In this case, they were looking at government departments, but there are other bits of research that looked at businesses and so forth. And they all had quite similar results, right? So I happened to pick this one. So they looked at government departments and they looked at this issue of strategic alignment, because that's what prioritization is about. It's about aligning your activity with your strategy. So strategic alignment, they found, explains the differences in performance. It explains 80% of the differences in performance. So the best performing organizations overall, I'm not talking about project organization, I'm talking about your whole organization, your company or your government department. 80% of the difference of that whole organization can be explained by the degree of strategic alignment. So this stuff really matters. Now, there are a few tips I'm probably going to try and weave into this talk. And the first one is as a PMO leader, it's really important that you are comfortable talking strategy with your leadership team. And many PMO leaders come from a project management, a project delivery background. And that's not necessarily the best background to have strategic discussions with your leadership team. Your project managers by nature, by the nature of the role, you have to be quite detail oriented. And that's almost the opposite of what you need to be doing when you're talking to your execs. So I'd recommend grabbing a book, reading it and really getting into the language. I know Jonathan, he's a professor at the Said Business School at Oxford University. Dan and I both went through Oxford's Business School program. Spoke to Jonathan several times. This book's quite accessible, and it's but there are other books available. So go get a book, read it, and get conversant, because this strategic alignment thing is really important. And as a PMO leader, if you can't talk strategy, ultimately you're going to find it difficult to align your projects with strategy. So there you go. First tip. Now, alignment doesn't only matter at this sort of mega corporate level, right, at the top level. It also matters at the project level too. So this data again comes from the PMI, and the message here is that when your projects are aligned with strategy, they're just more successful. So whether you're talking about delivering business value or finishing on time or finishing on budget, well-aligned projects are just more successful. They, and it makes sense because you can focus resources on them. You can get executive time to think about the things that are really important. So aligning your projects with strategy will help you deliver more projects, get them over the finish line. And you can take this to extremes. Amanda Oakenfold, currently a fellow at IBM for delivering projects in Australia. When we interviewed her, she was actually leading the PPM practice at Deloitte. And Amanda made this statement, which startled even me. at the time, which was that all project failure starts at project prioritization, right? And really what she's saying is if you're doing the wrong things, then even if you deliver the project successfully, you've failed because you delivered the wrong thing. And then there's a whole bunch of other things kind of in the delivery process that tie back to good project prioritization and executive commitment and all these things that lead to successful projects. So, going back to the question, does prioritization matter? Oh yeah, it matters at the corporate level, at the departmental level, at the PMO metrics level, and fundamentally at the individual project success level. So let's come back to this number. 20% of projects are waste. Now, what's really weird in the PMI data is that at the same time, half of projects are not resourced properly. Okay, so we're doing 20% too many projects, and we don't have enough resources on each project. Now, I don't know if anybody else likes this book. I love this book, and I used to read it to my kids all the time when they were young enough. So Cat in the Hat, and he's balancing all these things, he's juggling all these things, keeping them all up in the air. And then, of course, what happens to everyone who tries to keep too many things in the air happens to the cat, right? He falls on his head and everything goes everywhere. Now, the same thing happens with projects. If you overcommit, right? So this is the second tip. If you overcommit to doing too many projects, you will fail. By pushing your resource utilization to 100%, you do not increase the speed at which you deliver projects or value to the organization. The research and the data shows that you actually slow down project delivery by pushing your resources too far. And yeah, Bill's all over this one, right? We've kind of touched on that one before. So overcommitting those resources is guaranteed to lead to some kind of project failure. So again, does prioritization matter? Oh, yes, it does. So we're in this crazy situation where we have a bunch of projects that don't support our goals and a bunch of projects that are under-resourced. So it's really obvious what we should do about this, right? All we need to do is plot our portfolio onto a 2x2, something like this, right? So you've got strategic fit on this axis, and you've got how well are your projects going on this axis. And most organizations find that they have projects all over this particular map. So what do we do about this? Well, it's really simple, right? What we want to do is identify the projects that are waste. We want to identify the projects that are potential waste. If these projects fail, like we talked about earlier on, you not only lose the money and the resources you put into those projects, but you lose the business benefit that those projects would have given you, right? So that's waste as well. And so if we kill off some of these projects, invest in the ones that we want to save, guess what happens, right? The world looks rosy. And everybody kind of knows this. So why don't we all do it? Why do we still have this 20% waste number? And why do we still have too many projects on the books? And the bottom line is that this is difficult, right? Doing prioritization and aligning your projects with your strategy is hard. So why is it hard? Well, fundamentally, there are a number of reasons, but the first one, and probably the biggest one, is that your different stakeholders have different business goals. They have different journey through life, their professional journey, their personal journey. And as a consequence, they have very different idea of what's important to the business. Right? So think of it this way, the guy who's on the island, he's been on this island for 2 years, and he sees a boat and he's so excited, there's a boat, right? But the guy here, he's in the boat, he's been in that boat for a week. He hasn't had a drink or anything to eat in that time. He sees land and he thinks, land, hurrah. Okay, these are both perfectly sensible positions for someone to take, but they're completely opposite positions. And they're opposite because those people are coming from a different position. They've had a different journey to get to where they get to. And your leadership team is just like this. And that's why the sales guys are going to always be pushing you in one direction. The manufacturing VP is going to be pulling you in another direction. And the CFO is going to be trying to drag you somewhere else again. because they have just fundamentally different ideas of what's important. If you ask 6 executives around a table, what their strategic goals are, you're going to get 15, 20 different strategic goals, none of which are aligned, right? So we can't align our projects to strategy if we don't have agreement on what strategy means. And that's the foundation for the vast majority of project prioritization failure, is that you don't have really good, solid alignment in the executive team on that. Now, on top of that, you also have normal decision biases and group dynamics kicking in, dysfunctional group dynamics, politics, and we're going to touch on some of that later on. So I'm just going to keep going. So the obvious thing to do here, and there are a lot of the internet gurus will say this to you, is just get yourself a spreadsheet, create a bunch of criteria, and score your projects. Makes perfect sense, right? So we're going to define some business goals and turn them into criteria, and then we're going to score the projects against those criteria, get some pretty pictures, and then select our portfolio, and off we go. Well, that kind of makes sense, but the problem is that this is what's giving us that 20% number. If you look at the output of a lot of these spreadsheets, it's not very helpful. And again, the research, and we'll touch on this in a minute, but the research says that they're generally not very effective. So this is real data from a real customer of ours. So this is basically the score that came out of the spreadsheet for each project, with the highest score on the left and decreasing score as you move to the right. And the challenge here is that you've got these red areas, right? And where all these projects have got the exact same score. Now that's absolutely useless from the point of view of project prioritization. You can't tell those projects apart. And this is one common symptom of your spreadsheet not working properly. Another is that when you look at the projects, or when your leadership team looks at the projects, they'll look at this one and say, well, that one isn't as important as this, this one down here. And the spreadsheet scores won't really reflect reality. And we see this all the time. And as soon as that happens, the crucial thing that happens is that any confidence that your executive teams might have in the scores you're presenting to them collapses, right? You lose confidence in the scoring model. And as soon as you do that, people start just kind of piling in and trying to get their projects done because they don't believe the scoring model. So when you tell me that you've used up all the capacity, I don't believe you. When you tell me that that project over there is more important than my project, I don't believe you. So I'm going to try and push my project in, and it falls back to politics and horse trading. So, that's all very nice, but does that really happen? Yeah, it really, really does. So here's a real life example. I'm not going to name the customer, but it's a large government department. They do a lot of fire and emergency services work. And they had about 20% of their portfolio were pet projects. So I'm loosely defining a pet project as a project that has a very strong senior sponsor and that everybody else thinks is barking mad. And everybody else thought these projects were so barking mad that they tried to kill them off on 3 successive planning cycles. But the senior leader had defended his pet projects, and they were still consuming 20% of their resources. And at the same time, they committed about 30% more to 30% more work than they could actually deliver. Now, what's really interesting about this case study is that they had really good data. They had good criteria that made sense. They had good project estimates. They even had good estimates for the change impact of each individual project. But despite having all the data and all the charts, they still ended up in the situation where they were consuming resources on projects that weren't adding value, and they were overcommitting. And as soon as you overcommit, your projects slow down, you end up with errors and projects failing. Right? And that's what they saw. So let's try and figure out why. So they had a good list of good criteria. So what did they do with that? Well, what they did is what pretty much everybody does. They brought the leadership team into a room, and they wrote the criteria up onto the whiteboard. And then they basically said, right, criterion 1, what weighting should that criteria have? How important is that? And the most senior person in the room, CEO, let's call them, basically said, well, I think it should be 23.7%. Now, there are 2 problems with that. The first problem is that your CEO just made that number up. Now, if you challenge them and say, you just made that up, they will give you a perfectly clear and rational sounding explanation for where that number came from. But all of the research, all the psychology research says they just made it up. If you don't believe me, go and read Dan Kahneman, the Nobel laureate's book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, and you'll realize what a mess we are as decision-making machines. Okay, we human beings. So she just made that number up. The second problem is that the rest of the room is now thinking this way. Right? So this guy's going, well, I don't agree with that, but do I really want to take on the boss, right? So now he's thinking about politics. He's not thinking what the number should be. He's thinking about politics. And this person's kind of going, no, I'm just going to keep my head down. And this one over here is going, look, this model is meaningless. I'm just going to try and get my project in, right, before anybody else does. And this is where it all falls down, is that the only thing that the people around the table kind of agree on is that the model is wrong. And if they don't believe in the model, then it's basically useless for selecting projects. So there's a lack of buy-in, then there's no alignment, and you're back to politics and salesmanship. So at this point, we should all pack up and go home. No, that's not right. Luckily, there's a lot of research, academic research, into how to prioritize projects. So people have come up with lots and lots of really interesting methodologies. Some of them are just variations on the standard spreadsheet. Some of them are just the standard spreadsheet. Some of them are really cunning and devious. But there's lots and lots of different methodologies for prioritizing projects. And researchers have looked at those over the last decade or two. And in 2017, the University of New South Wales brought all of that research together. And they looked at over 100 different methods of prioritizing projects and came to the rather shocking conclusion that only 2 of those methods were suitable for project prioritization. And suitable was their word. Right? So there are only really 2 methods that consistently work. And those methods, one was called DEA, Data Envelopment Analysis. And DEA is great, but it's really, really difficult to implement well. The other method is AHP, or Analytic Hierarchy Process. Scary sounding name, that's academics for you. The guy who invented it was a researcher out of Wharton School for Business, but actually it's not scary. AHP is pretty simple, and we'll show you what it looks like in a few minutes. All right. So the message here is that you don't actually have to go out and try and figure out what the best way to prioritize projects is. Right? That work's been done. There's data, there's research behind this. And I could give you paper after paper that talks about AHP and prioritization and why and how it works. Okay. So this is real research. And your typical spreadsheet just doesn't have that basis in research. So what happened to our customer? Well, what happened was we imported their data into our AHP product, into our prioritization product, which is powered by this AHP method. And we didn't change the data. We used exactly the same data. So it wasn't the data that was magic. What they did was they used this AHP process to really get executives to think strategically and to get a good conversation going and to get buy-in for the weighting, for the scoring model for those projects. And as soon as they did that, the guy who'd been defending these pet projects for 3 years put his hand up and said, do you know what, my projects are not very good, let's get rid of them. And they were able to avoid the overcommitment problem, right? So they were able to right-size the portfolio. So that was not about the data. It wasn't about the scoring. It was simply about the methodology they used. That's the only thing they changed the methodology for getting that definition of strategic value and getting your leadership team aligned around that. So we actually agree with this picture so long as you use some special sauce on the top here, right? And that special sauce is AHP. So what I'm going to do is just jump in and out of the product and show you a little bit what this process can look like. And again, this isn't meant to be a deep product demo, but more just to give you a taste of what prioritization done right looks like. So let me get rid of this. There we go. All right, so it all starts off with criteria, right? So it starts off with business goals being mapped into criteria. Now on our website, there's a tremendous video done by one of our partners and good friend, Roberto Camagno, who is a decision-making researcher himself. And he did this webinar about how to build your list of criteria. So I'm not going to cover that right now. You can go to our website, look for the video and watch that. It's a really good place to start. Even if you don't go on to use our software or even AHP, getting those criteria right will really add value. So go hunt that video down. So it starts off with coming up with a set of criteria, and those criteria tend to be hierarchical, like this, where we've got risk and it's made up of organizational, technical, technology risk, and so on and so forth, right? And then what we do is we do bring the executive team together, and but we don't ask them what weight we should put on any one particular criterion. Instead, what AHP does is it breaks that discussion down and it structures it into a really clear way, so that we present 2 criteria at a time and we ask which one of these is more important. Now, this is criteria weighting is a subjective judgment. And the more you can break that kind of judgment down, the more bias you can squeeze out of your decision-making process. So this is helping us squeeze out a lot of that bias in the decisions. So we simply ask, which one is more important, A or B? And then if I think cost reduction is more important, is it a little bit more important or a lot more important? Okay, so it's a really simple question, but crucially we do it as it's a team sport, right? We get all your executives on board having that discussion, and you can do this in real-time meetings. I don't know if Dan's still awake, but I sent him a link a little earlier to see, oh, there you go, he's voting away, in real time. And what you're looking for is situations where you have disagreement, right? The disagreement is gold, because that's when we can say, gee, Brian, can you explain your point of view? And gee, George, who's gone a bit extreme on us here, can you explain your point of view? And what happens here is that they learn about each other's point of view. So the guy in the boat learns a little bit about life on an island, and the guy on the island learns a bit about life on the boat. And so they both become better decision makers because they have a more rounded picture. And usually what happens is they start to come a bit closer. So in this case, George has realized that actually, Brian has a really good point, and he's come and joined these guys over here. And so what you're doing here is you're doing 2 things. You're improving that decision quality, as I just described. But crucially, you're also building buy-in, because now everybody understands where this model is coming from, where this scoring model is coming from, and they feel like they had hands-on developing it. Now, funnily enough, Dan interviewed one of our customers in the last couple of days, and just sort of, how did you find it? What worked, what didn't? And one of the things that particular customer said is that even when the executives were still miles apart, they were really happy with the outcome and supported the model, because they understood, they felt like they'd been heard and that they'd contributed, and they understood why their point of view wasn't the point of view that the team went with, right? So they could support the decision. And if you think back to the fire service example, that's what was missing, any level of buy-in to that model, because your executives are going to disagree. They're not going to be totally aligned on everything. So what you need is a mechanism that can help them come together enough that they can live with and support the model that you come up with. So that's, and then the output of that is just a nice little chart that shows you the weight of each of the criteria, and we can drill into that, and we get a little table down here. And the fun thing about this is that you can then start to use this to drive ideation. So if I was running this portfolio, I would turn around to the leadership team and say, hey, why don't we have an ideation challenge around service differentiation? Just challenge the organization to come up with 10 projects that will really move the needle, you know, change the game on service differentiation, or whatever it may be. All right, so this is more than just a model to help us score. This is a statement of our strategic intent, and as such, you can use it to communicate, to educate, and to actually drive better quality projects into your pipeline to start with. So that's the first bit that we talked about, the first part of the prioritization process. There we go. So that's that piece, and that's what it looks like. Let's move on to this one, where we're collecting and scoring projects, because this is also important. So within what's really important here is that you have consistency, that you can collect data, that you get the right input from the right subject matter experts at the right time. Because if you put rubbish data into this, into the system, if you're when you're scoring your projects, if you put poor data in, then you're going to get poor answers out the other end. So it's worth putting some effort into this. And a really good place to start is defining your evaluation process. So we within Transparent Choice, we give you a nice little Kanban that lets you do that, and you can edit this and tailor it to your own needs. And then projects come in on the left-hand side here, and they move through this process. And each step, you're doing a bit more evaluation. You're adding a little bit meat to the bones of your project. So, for example, at this step, we're doing risk assessment. So when you drop a project, drag and drop a project into the risk assessment step, the software will automatically kick off what we call a notification that will send an email to a subject matter expert, maybe a senior project manager or something, and ask them to fill in a form to do a risk assessment on this particular project. And then that data flows directly into Transparent Choice, where it populates your scoring model. All right, so this is a really good way of ensuring you're getting the right people, putting the right data in at the right time, efficiently, without having to chase around with spreadsheets and copying, pasting data all over the place, and doing that, as I say, efficiently and quickly. So that brings us to kind of the next step, which is the pretty pictures, right? So we're going to select and balance and optimize the portfolio before rolling it out. So let's jump back here. So you bring it all together, and you end up with some nice, pretty pictures. So what we've got here at the top, we have sort of key metrics that we want to track. So we've got budget, how much are we spending on projects, how many resources are we using? We keep coming back to that resource management idea, capacity management, and also perhaps some KPIs, some key performance indicators. In this case, hard savings. So this is the portfolio for an airline that's about to go bust. If they don't save $20 million next year, then they're going to go bust, right? That's sort of the scenario. So we look at this and we say, oh, gee, look, we're over budget, right? We're spending too much. We're going to have to cut something. So let's look at this, this chart. So this axis is value. So this is the score. This is our lovely new shiny strategic score that your executives all love and buy in and support. So this is the value score, and this is the cost. So this is basically value for money. Good value for money lives up here, and bad value for money lives down at the other end, right? So this is good, and this is bad. Now, the way I've got this set up, circles represent projects that have been approved. And what we see straight away, right? We've spent too much money. We see down here a couple of projects, a couple of these circles that are not very good value for money. In fact, they're pretty bad value for money. So the rational thing to do now is we'll go in and we'll get rid of this project. Okay, we'll say go away. That one is going on the rejected pile. And so when that happens, what we can see straight away is that now we're within budget, we're within our resource capacity, and we project we'll hit our KPI. And remember, it's all about hitting the business goals, right? That's what this is all about. So we're now tracking to hit our KPI. Everything is good in project land. All right, so this is a nice little story. There's lots of different visualizations. This one helps you figure out how much you should be spending on your portfolio, for example. But if you want to come up with a really fast first cut optimization of your portfolio, what I would recommend you do is you rank your projects by value for money, as we've got here, and then you start at the top and you keep going. This is cumulative cost here now. So I forget how much budget we had, 10 million or something. So you come down and you say, great, I'm going to select these ones and then approve them, right? So you just approve them there. So that's a really good way of making sure that when you start the process, when you walk into the room with your leadership team, you've got an idea of what a good portfolio would look like, one that's optimized around delivering value for money. And that's usually the start of a discussion, because there's always something that upsets the apple cart, or a project that has to be jammed in because it's being driven by a key client or something like that. But this is a really good way to start optimizing that portfolio. So here we go. So that's basically how the process looks. Now, interestingly, one of the things I just wanted to share with you is that this is a journey for us, just as it is for everybody else. So, we've got customers who are using this and being very successful, but that doesn't mean we rest on our laurels. So what we're aiming for in the next 3 to 6 months is to deliver more functionality to help you optimize that portfolio. Especially in a situation, large corporations in particular, you have lots of different sources of demand, and you often have multiple delivery teams, and you've got a many-to-many relationship between them, and it's just a big spaghetti mess of connections between them, and trying to prioritize projects at different levels. It's really, really difficult process. So we're developing an AI-guided tool that lets you enter your constraints, so multiple constraints, different resource pools, different budget pools, and project dependencies as well, and then hit a big magic button, and the software will simulate a few thousand, and it's not random simulation, it's kind of AI-guided simulation. It'll simulate a few thousand portfolios and try and find the one that makes the best use of the resources that you have, that delivers the most value that you can squeeze out of the resources that you have, the budget and the people. So, at its heart, this is about always trying to figure out, how do we make more efficient use of the resources that we have to deliver that business value, and the business value, coming right back to the very first slide, that's what your portfolio is all about. So I promised we'd talk a little bit about getting the leadership team aligned. And so just a couple of thoughts on that. The first one is to identify the pain in their words, right? So is there pain the fact that, I just can't get stuff done? Or why is it you guys take so long to deliver a project? Or is it projects are always failing? Or is it, I can never seem to get my project done, right? Whatever the pain is that they talk about, that's what you should talk to them about when you're looking for support in improving the prioritization process. My second bit of advice is inspired by Nike. Just do it, right? If you go and spend a load of time explaining all about methodologies and what executives hear is blah, 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 blah. Right? So in my experience, it's much better to just do it. Deploy, if you work with us at the moment, you can tell from my hair that we're in the middle of COVID lockdown, definitely have COVID hair. So at the minute we have a program where we're giving away free software, assuming you can convince us that you qualify. You can get free software for a while to help everybody recover, and just use that to deploy the software in-house and show the executives the value. I wouldn't recommend just putting your whole portfolio in there, but do it with a subset so that your executives can go through that process and they can see the value for themselves that they would get from the rich conversation about alignment, from the data on projects, those charts, that will just help them make the decisions better and more consistently. So you can do that through our website. You can click request a demo, or there's the COVID program page where you can actually request access to the software for free, and just go and do it. Now, I'd suggest that you engage one of our partners in a quick start engagement to make sure that you have a good experience, you get a good outcome. But it's that's very low cost to do that. In addition, I would go and check out our online resources page on our website. As I mentioned, Preeti is going to send the slides out, so you'll have this link. And on here, you'll find a whole bunch of resources about prioritization in particular, as well as PMO effectiveness. And some of these materials are very much aimed at the leadership team. All right, let's see if we can find PowerPoint again. So that's about it from us. Thank you very much for your time, and I will take I guess any questions. Dan, I've not really been keeping an eye on the chat window, I'm afraid.
We had a sort of a question comment from Michelle, which was just around you obviously cancelled the project in the demo. And I think kind of she was flagging, obviously it may have been there for another reason, like it was an enabler or it was a compliance commitment. How do we normally deal with that, or how does the software deal with those kind of scenarios?
Great question. So yes, you're absolutely right, Michelle, that often there are other reasons that projects are in there. Compliance is a funny one because in a way being compliant is, one of your goals is to stay in business, and if you're not compliant, you won't be in business for long. So it is kind of aligned. But what we tend to recommend is that things like compliance you treat as a gate, right? So if it's a compliance project, you don't really need to prioritize it. It's useful to know its priority to help you scheduling, make scheduling decisions, but you've got to do it. So just do it. And so in the software, you can set up little flags that let you mark projects that you're forcing in for exactly that reason. So you wouldn't accidentally take out the project that you have to do for some other reason. So you can definitely capture that.
Very good. Yeah, a couple of questions from Navin. So one, does the software have capability to determine and include other measures like MPV, IRR, payback, so some of those kind of hard data points that exist in organizations? Yeah, absolutely, Navin. Those financial metrics are often one of the pillars in that sort of strategy. Having financial factors is often one of the key components. And so the software will actually handle sort of very subjective data. So weighting criteria is entirely subjective. For example, and you can also put in really hard data. So the cost of a project can often be really quite hard data, or MPV, as you say. And those things you can use them either as part of your decision model, or even just as information to help you keep track of how much you're spending or what your IRR is likely to be. And the second part of that question was, does the software have capability for determining sort of plan versus actual for resourcing? That's a really good point. So the plan versus actual. So we don't position ourselves as PPM software. We're very complementary to PPM software. So you would typically have, Microsoft or PlanView or somebody like that, or CA, or there's hundreds of them. That do a really good job of managing your projects and reporting plan versus actual in the execution phase. And we can take that data and present it, but Transparent Choice isn't the tool that you would use for tracking tasks within a project and that plan versus actual on cost or resources or whatever. So we can report on it,
by sucking it out of the PPM tool.
Yeah, I mean, so building on that, I think Naveen's just dropped another question, but so how does this standalone prioritization software differ from PPM software with prioritization modules? So Plan View, Planisware, Microsoft PPM.
It's a great example. So Plan View, Planisware, they simply don't have that AHP methodology, is the answer. So they are basically the spreadsheet that failed put into software. So they have lovely pictures, but no real methodology. Many PPM tools will talk about prioritization, and actually what they mean is they have a field that you can put some indicator of priority in, right? So there's no mechanism for determining it. Others have quite good, good-looking things that let you define some criteria. Some of them even let you weight the criteria, but they do it in the way that fails, right? In that meeting mechanism where you have to actually put in what's the weighting for this criterion. So it's the AHP method that lets you determine that and get people aligned about that model, which is the foundation. And if you don't have that, then you're wasting your time, in my opinion, and the research would seem to back that up.
Now, Stuart, I know we've got a hard finish in about 1 minute. So yeah, I think it's just great at this point to take the opportunity to thank everyone for their time. It's great. We've had pretty much full attendance through the course of this, which I think is stands testament to how much effort people are making to do things the right way.
Or how much we're paying them to stay on board.
And well, I can speak for myself, but you know, it's great to see everyone, and just a reminder that Stuart and I are available to catch up with you. Details of how to book into our diaries will come out on Pretty's email after this session. And as Stuart says, there's tons of great resources to do further research, and we have tried to set the website up to give you that opportunity in order to learn about AHP, and you know, we believe it's the right approach to take. We hope you choose to take it with us in our software, but the resources are there very much for everyone to benefit from.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.